Good morning, y'all. I want to do something a little different in this morning's update. I want to talk about money. Not because money is the most important thing about this story. It is not. Not by a long stretch, and I will explain why in a moment. But because the scale of what California's coast represents in financial terms is the clearest possible way to communicate the scale of what is at stake, and the most current scientific assessment of what is coming to that coast suggests that the financial exposure is so extraordinary that I think it deserves to be stated plainly and in full before we talk about anything else. The Pacific Institute, one of the leading research organizations on California coastal issues, has estimated that by the end of this century, with projected sea level rise, California stands to lose tens of billions of dollars of coastal real estate to flooding and erosion. The California Legislative Analyst's Office has specifically noted that with 3 to 6 feet of sea level rise, up to 2/3 of Southern California beaches could erode completely. 2/3. Gone. Not narrowed, not reduced, gone. And the current trajectory of sea level rise, which one recent study found rose more than 30% faster in 2024 than experts originally projected, is making the timeline for those losses shorter, not longer. So before we talk about the cliffs and the highways and the neighborhoods and the people, let me tell you about the money. Because the money is one way of measuring how seriously this coast and this country should be taking what the science is saying. There are properties sitting on the edge of coastal bluffs in Palos Verdes and Big Sur and Malibu and Laguna Beach that are worth millions of dollars individually and tens of billions of dollars collectively. There are hotels and resorts and restaurants and shops along the California coast whose entire economic value rests on the assumption that the beach will be there, that the sand will be there, that the view will be there, that the coastline will remain where it is long enough for the investment to pay off. There are cities whose entire municipal identity, whose tax base, whose tourism economy is built around the beach. And the beach is leaving, not quickly enough that any individual day feels dramatically different from the day before, but measurably, documentably, at rates that the USGS's coastal storm modeling system can quantify and map and project forward in time. The beach is leaving. The cliffs are retreating. The infrastructure that connects coastal communities to each other and to the broader state is being undermined. And the financial exposure represented by all of that is a number so large that it would reshape any honest accounting of California's economic future if it were fully incorporated into the calculations. Let me be specific about the physical processes that are driving this financial exposure, because understanding the mechanism is what allows the financial implications to be properly scoped. California's coast is eroding through 2 primary physical processes that work together and amplify each other. The first is cliff erosion, the progressive undercutting of the coastal bluffs by wave action, accelerated by El Niño storms, by atmospheric rivers, by king tide events, and by the rising background sea level that moves the zone of maximum wave attack progressively higher on the bluff face. The rates of cliff retreat documented by the USGS range from a few inches per year at the most resistant locations to more than 16 feet per year at the most vulnerable ones, with Palos Verdes, Big Sur, and the Lost Coast specifically identified as high retreat areas. The second process is beach erosion, the removal of sand from coastal beaches by longshore currents and storm wave action, without adequate replacement from the rivers and streams that historically supplied sand to the coast. California's rivers have been dammed to the point where the natural sand supply to the coast has been dramatically reduced, and the beaches that remain are being progressively thinned and narrowed by the same wave action and current dynamics that have always existed, but without the sand replacement that used to balance the removal. As beaches thin, the protective function they provide, absorbing wave energy before it reaches the cliff base, is reduced, which accelerates cliff erosion. The 2 processes feed each other. The loss of beach accelerates cliff retreat. Cliff retreat does not always replace beach sand at a rate that compensates for beach loss. The coast gets narrower and the exposure of infrastructure and property increases continuously. The specific infrastructure that sits in the path of this accelerating erosion process is not abstract. Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, hugs the bluffs and beaches of the California coast for hundreds of miles. In Big Sur, it has already partially collapsed into the ocean at the Rat Creek site when an atmospheric river overwhelmed the drainage infrastructure and carried the road surface down to the sea. The repair of that collapse took months and cost millions of dollars, and the conditions that produced it, fire-denuded hillsides above the highway losing their soil stability, atmospheric river precipitation loading the destabilized slopes with water, Highway 1 serving as the final barrier between the hillside and the ocean, are conditions that are going to recur. The combination of California's ongoing wildfire seasons, which strip vegetation from hillsides and dramatically increase their erosion vulnerability, with the atmospheric river storms that deliver extraordinary precipitation to those same hillsides, is one of the most destructive compound hazard combinations on the California coast. And it has been documented, and it will happen again, The only question is where along the 800 miles of Highway 1 the next collapse occurs, and when. The railroad lines along the Southern California coast, the tracks that carry both Amtrak passenger trains and BNSF freight trains through San Diego and Orange counties, with trains running between the tracks and the ocean on terrain that is actively eroding, represent a national transportation infrastructure vulnerability that has been quietly climbing. The priority list of infrastructure planners and defense officials. The tracks at San Clemente have been the subject of repeated emergency interventions, as the bluffs on which they sit have retreated toward the sea. A 2022 landslide event in San Clemente left red tags on apartment buildings, yellow tags on others, and triggered emergency stabilization work on the railroad right of way below the collapsed slope. This is not a new problem. It is an old problem that is getting worse, and the financial cost of keeping that railroad operational, not improving it, just keeping it where it is while the bluff beneath it retreats, is a number that escalates every year as the retreat accelerates. The beach story deserves its own space in this financial accounting, because the California beach is not just a recreational amenity, it is economic infrastructure. Beach tourism in California generates billions of dollars of economic activity every year. Hotel stays, restaurant meals, retail sales, the entire service economy of every coastal community, whose commercial center exists because people want to be near the ocean. When the Legislative Analyst's Office says that up to 2/3 of Southern California beaches could erode completely with projected sea level rise, they are not just describing a recreational loss. They are describing the destruction of the economic foundation of dozens of cities and communities whose entire financial identity is built around an oceanfront that the ocean is reclaiming. The beaches of Santa Monica, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Del Mar, Coronado, all of them are narrowing. Some of them are narrowing rapidly. And the sand nourishment projects that have been used to artificially maintain beach width, trucking sand onto beaches that would otherwise disappear, are increasingly expensive, increasingly impermanent, and increasingly inadequate as the rate of loss accelerates. The wastewater infrastructure story is one that I find myself returning to repeatedly in any serious discussion of California coastal danger, because it represents a category of loss that most people never think about, and that has some of the most severe public health implications of any coastal erosion scenario. 15 wastewater treatment plants along the California coast will be exposed to flooding with 3 feet of sea level rise. 36 will be exposed with 6 feet. 30 of those 36 at-risk plants are in the San Francisco Bay Area, where the combination of low-lying bayshore elevations and the amplifying effect of rising groundwater levels, a phenomenon where higher ocean water levels push underground water levels up, flooding areas that are not directly adjacent to the ocean, makes the vulnerability particularly acute. A wastewater treatment plant that is flooded is not just an infrastructure failure. It is a public health emergency that threatens the health of everyone who depends on that plant for sewage treatment. And in California's coastal cities, that means millions of people. The treatment plants that process sewage for Oakland, for Berkeley, for parts of San Francisco, for the communities around Humboldt Bay, all of them are now being assessed for their vulnerability to sea level rise and coastal flooding in planning documents that did not exist a decade ago and that are taking on increasing urgency as the scientific projections firm up. Now let me tell you about the tsunami piece of this financial picture, because the tsunami hazard represents a completely different timescale of loss. Not gradual, not foreseeable on a years to decades planning horizon, but sudden and catastrophic and arriving without the kind of progressive warning signals that allow communities to adapt. The California Geological Survey updated the statewide tsunami hazard maps in 2025, and the updates were significant. In the Los Angeles area, the mapped tsunami inundation zones were expanded in Long Beach, Malibu, Santa Monica, Venice, Marina del Rey, and other coastal communities. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which together handle approximately 40% of U.S. imports, are identified as areas where an extreme tsunami scenario could inundate almost all of the portland and some surrounding communities. The financial value of the infrastructure, equipment, and cargo in those ports at any given moment represents a sum that would, by itself, dwarf most natural disaster losses in American history. The financial value of the disruption to the national supply chain from an extended closure of the ports would be orders of magnitude larger still. San Francisco's updated maps show expanded inundation zones in the financial district and the Embarcadero area. The Embarcadero BART and Muni stations, through which hundreds of thousands of transit riders pass every day, are now in the mapped hazard zone. The financial district buildings that sit at the foot of Market Street are in the mapped hazard zone. The real estate value of those buildings alone runs to tens of billions of dollars, and the disruption to San Francisco's role as a financial and technology hub from a major tsunami inundation event, even a moderate one, not the worst-case scenario, would be felt not just in California, but throughout the national economy. Let me close with something that I think is easy to lose in a conversation that has been necessarily heavy on numbers and financial projections, because the numbers are the frame, but they are not the picture. The picture is the people. The 16 million Californians who live in areas the USGS identifies as extreme seismic hazard zones, many of which overlap with the coastal erosion and tsunami hazard zones. The 2 million people who live along the Hayward Fault in the East Bay, communities that also face tsunami inundation risk from certain scenarios. The communities of Eureka and Humboldt Bay, where the Cascadia tsunami scenario with 6.5-foot land subsidence could inundate 116 square miles of coastline, rather than the 35 square miles that current inundation maps show. The residents of Carlsbad watching the ocean approach the road that connects their community. The families in cliffside homes in Palos Verdes watching their neighborhood's geological stability monitored by instruments that are reporting rates of movement that make long-term planning increasingly difficult. The money matters because it tells you the scale. The science matters because it tells you the trajectory. But ultimately, the reason this story matters is the people who live on and near the California coast, who love it, who have built their lives around it, and who deserve to have its dangers understood as clearly and as honestly as its beauty has always been celebrated. This channel is committed to that honesty, and as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.